On November 13, 1820, American mariner Henry Palmer and his crew arrived at an island near the Antarctic Peninsula, which he later named Deception Island. What transpired over the next couple of days was shrouded in mystery and horror. For many years, Palmer kept the gruesome details to himself, only disclosing the unsettling events that unfolded shortly before his death in 1877. Fast forward 137 years, and a team of Australian scientists who set foot on the island encountered an even grimmer scenario, deepening the belief that this place should remain untouched and uninhabited. Over the years, research stations have been established and subsequently abandoned for various reasons, many of which remain unclear. The occurrences of 1957 were kept under wraps by the Australian government for decades until Richard McCree, a scientist originally from the United States, ultimately divulged the truth of what transpired there. Here's Henry Palmer's narrative rephrased. The moment I trod upon the land that I would come to call Deception Island, a wave of unease washed over me. I had visited many shores throughout my sailor's life and had never before felt such a sensation, which startled me. As I scanned the surroundings, I felt an unsettling awareness, as if invisible eyes were upon me. I was certain no humans inhabited this land, apart from some native wildlife, yet an instinct urged me to remain cautious. I ordered my men to set up our camp just above the high tide line. As dusk was approaching, and we were unfamiliar with the territory we intended to explore at first light, as was customary, we conducted a head count each morning to ensure nobody had vanished overnight. I can still vividly recall the first morning when I took a sip of coffee and heard someone shouting, "Norris and Clark are missing!" I immediately rushed to the tent they shared and confirmed their absence. Gathering everyone, I rapidly organized 4 search parties to comb the island for the 2 missing crew members, instructing them to remain armed. I selected 2 of my men to accompany me and we set out in different directions. As we strolled along the beach, making our way towards a rocky outcrop, we speculated about the possible fates of our comrades. I had a strict rule in place. Nobody could leave camp without informing me or the first mate, George, of their whereabouts, even for minor needs. The unknown could harbor all manner of dangers. After some time, we stumbled upon what appeared to be human footprints in the sand, along with a piece of clothing belonging to one of the men. More troubling still were the drag marks we found, implying that something had been pulled along the sand. Ahead of us, we spotted a cave at the base of the rock formation, exactly where the footprints seemed to be leading. "Edward, keep your rifle ready. Something feels amiss," I warned. "Aye, sir," he replied, raising his rifle. We approached the cave cautiously, and I unsheathed my pistol, cocking it quietly. As we drew closer, an oppressive tension filled the air. These men were sailors, not soldiers. Having fought in the War of 1812, I was intimately familiar with death, both in inflicting it and experiencing it, which had left me with a haunting detachment and a burden of premonitions, disturbing thoughts that I wished I could shake. "Gents, I will take the lead. Follow closely behind and don't shoot unless you intend to kill," I instructed. As the leader, I couldn't expect my men to do what I wasn't willing to do myself. Stepping toward the entrance of the cave, I noticed it extended further back and was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by a faint light spilling in. I took a deep breath before entering. In situations like this, fear often clawed at me, yet I steeled my resolve for the sake of my crew. The instant I entered the darkness, I heard a gurgling sound followed by labored breathing, which my men seemed oblivious to. Advancing further, it became too dark to see, prompting me to tell my crew to light their candles. Almost as soon as our candles flickered to life, I was met with the unsettling sounds of moaning and movement nearby. Pressing on, we approached a sharp bend in the cave, and I sensed we were on the verge of something ominous. I turned to my men with a warning, "Prepare yourselves. Whatever is ahead is close." I saw fear etched on their faces, but knew I must maintain my composure. As I rounded the corner, I was gripped by shock. Lying before us were the lifeless, skinless bodies of Norris and Clark. The horror was unimaginable. Their flesh had been gouged from their bodies as if they'd been turned inside out. I struggled to tell them apart. Just then, one of them, the closest to me, raised an arm, opened his hand, and attempted to speak, though his words were lost to me. I hurried to kneel beside him, and I was met with pure terror in his gaze. I noticed an unusual stone in his hand, which shimmered a vibrant crimson, unlike any red I had encountered before. The other man beside him had a similar red stone but showed no signs of life. Suddenly, the first man's arm fell limp, letting the stone tumble across the cave floor. Edward reached to pick it up, but I cautioned him to refrain, saying, "Edward, don't touch it. We don't know what it is." He recoiled in fright against the wall. "What has happened to these men, sir?" he asked. "I haven't the faintest idea. Something unspeakable, that's for certain. There's nothing I can think of that could cause such devastation," I replied. I instructed 2 of them to go fetch the remaining crew and bring blankets, so we could take the bodies back for examination. As I waited in the cave, an overwhelming dread filled me. I knew we had to evacuate the island sooner than planned. We had intended to stay for 6 days, but I felt we needed to leave at first light. Before long, the men returned. Upon witnessing the gruesome sight of their fallen comrades, they crossed themselves and murmured prayers. Speculations of devilry or witchcraft danced among them, but I was beyond belief. All I knew was that we must escape this cursed place. I directed the men to wrap the bodies in blankets and bear them back to camp. I also forbade anyone from touching the ominous red stones. Once we arrived back at camp, we examined the remains for any indication of what had occurred, yet found only more bewilderment. That afternoon we laid them to rest. What unfolded the following day cemented my resolve never to return to Deception Island for as long as I draw breath. The next morning, I ordered the men to dismantle our camp as soon as they had breakfast. Some of the crew approached me, indicating they needed to relieve themselves, and I granted permission. As I was packing my gear, I suddenly heard one of them shout, "Palmer, get over here immediately." I dropped my belongings and hurried toward their voices. Upon my arrival, I saw one of them pointing at something. I looked over, and what I beheld to this day is beyond comprehension. There before me were the gaping, empty graves of Norris and Clark. My initial thought was that one of the crew had tampered with the bodies, but that was quickly dismissed. These men were terrified, not reckless. "Men, gather your belongings. We're leaving this forsaken place at once," I commanded. I had never witnessed them move so quickly. While we packed our camp, I overheard whispers of what each man thought was responsible. As we departed, one remark echoed in my memory. "This island is a wicked place and should be left alone." I wholeheartedly agreed with that sentiment, vowing never to return. I named it Deception Island in hopes of deterring others from visiting. Now this is the account of McCree. I had been warned and threatened to keep silent about the events on Deception Island in 1957. Yet I can remain quiet no longer. I owe it to my fallen comrades, with whom I had shared years of friendship before the tragedy. There were 5 of us stationed on the island that January, marking the beginning of summer. Our station was situated near an active volcano, which kept the temperature relatively warm, occasionally soaring to an uncomfortable 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The initial week of our stay unfolded with little incident, but everything shifted on the 8th day. I distinctly remember my colleagues, Ian and Ross, returning after a full day of exploration, carrying sediment samples from the volcano, along with other findings they deemed intriguing, being geologists. That night, I was awakened in the early hours and wandered past the room where Ian and Ross were analyzing their samples. I noticed they were still inside, which struck me as odd. Surely they couldn't be that engrossed. They stood rather close together, their backs to me, whispering quietly. Being half asleep, I thought nothing amiss. However, it later escalated into something far more sinister. The following morning, making my way to the mess hall for breakfast, I passed their room yet again and found them standing in the exact position as before. "Morning, guys. Have you seriously been standing there all night?" I queried. They glanced at me, nodded silently, and then resumed their hushed conversation without a word more. I lingered for a moment, expecting them to respond, but they remained unresponsive, turning their backs to me again. Entering the mess hall, I found Peter and Max already there. After I got my breakfast and settled down with them, I asked, "Did you get a chance to speak with Ian and Ross this morning?" They're acting strangely. "No, I saw them in the room too, but didn't interact." "Why?" Max replied. "I caught sight of them late last night in the same place, trying to talk, but they just nodded at me and kept whispering," I explained. "Sounds odd. Maybe they're just too excited about the rocks they found. Geologists can be pretty giddy," Peter mused. "Yeah, perhaps," I agreed. and we resumed our breakfast in an uneasy silence. After breakfast, I returned to my room to get dressed, planning to spend the day scouring the beach for interesting marine life. As I passed by Ross and Ian's rock room, I noticed it was empty. I continued to their individual rooms, but neither was there. Our protocol required that anyone leaving the station inform someone of their whereabouts, and expected to find Peter and Max. They dismissed my concerns, assuring me that my friends had simply forgotten to check in along the beach. I busied myself examining various marine creatures. While an unsettling sensation nagged at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, looming just behind me. Later in the afternoon, I made my way back to the station, and upon entering, I found Max and Peter standing there, their expressions grave. "What's wrong?" I inquired. "Ian and Ross should have returned by now. They know better than to wander off," Max replied, worry etched on his face. "What should we do?" I asked, sensing the urgency. Peter responded, "What can we do? It's going to get dark soon, and the last thing I want to do is run around this island in the dark." "I agree, but we should at least wait a while longer. What if they come back?" I suggested. Peter nodded in consent, adding, "If they don't, we'll head out early tomorrow morning before sunrise," Max muttered. "I can't believe they'd be so reckless. They know better." Dinner passed in silence, none of us able to voice our growing anxieties. I could feel my mind racing while I hardly slept that night, plagued by strange thoughts. Awoken in the early hours, I heard Peter's voice. "It's time. Let's get dressed and go find them." Without a word, I sprang from bed, quickly dressing to brave the icy Arctic chill. We spent the entire day searching, but found no signs of our missing companions. Once back at the station, Max went to the radio and reached someone on Livingston Island. They promised to send help the next day, and assured us they'd inform our headquarters in Australia about the situation. Following dinner, we each retired to our rooms, and exhaustion soon pulled me into a deep sleep. My slumber was abruptly interrupted by a panicked cry. "Help me! Help me!" Startled, I sat up in a whirlwind of confusion, unsure if I was dreaming. Another voice shouted, "Someone, please, God, help me." I couldn't identify who was calling, but I jumped out of bed, grabbing the lantern I always kept on hand, and raced toward Max and Peter's rooms. As I neared Max's room, I heard a disturbing crunching noise, accompanied by chattering teeth. Hesitantly, I raised the lantern and stepped into Max's room, saying aloud, "What on earth?" What I saw will forever haunt my memories. There stood two men, both hideously skinless, devouring Max. As they turned their eyes toward me, a surge of adrenaline propelled me back down the hall to Peter's room. "Peter! Peter, wake up, now!" I yelled as I burst into his room. He was still asleep, oblivious to the chaos. I shook him roughly, exclaiming, "Get up! We have to leave. Something has happened to Max. I'll explain later." Confused, Peter's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What is happening?" I grasped his arm, attempting to pull him out of bed when I froze, the look of horror on his face mirroring my own fear. I turned to see what he was gasping at. "What in the name of God?" Peter uttered, his voice trembling. "We need to move now." But as I spoke, the monstrous beings lunged towards us. Backed against the wall, I watched as they seized Peter, gnawing and biting into him. The screams that erupted from him were beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I knew I had to act and ran to grab the fire axe located in the hallway to defend him. As I turned to sprint toward the door, one of the skinless men snapped its gaze toward me and began advancing. Overcome by panic, my instinct to flee overwhelmed me, and I abandoned the axe. I charged towards the mess hall, determined to find a hiding place. The idea of the walk-in fridge struck me, and I knew it would be icy inside, but I preferred that over facing those monsters. In my sprint, I seized one of the down jackets from the rack, hoping it would offer some protection against the cold. Once inside the mess hall, I dashed to the walk-in fridge, opened the door, and quickly slipped inside. I wasted no time securing the door with twine, tying it to the handle and a sturdy shelf inside. As I donned the jacket, I edged away from the entrance. It wasn't long before I heard scratching sounds, as though something was desperately trying to break through. The twine creaked ominously, stretching to its limits while I prayed it wouldn't give way. For what felt like an eternity, I sat in darkness, the sounds of scratching resonating in my ears, until I finally decided to turn off the lantern, plunging myself into complete blackness. I curled up in the corner, shivering. The inadequacy of my clothing left me vulnerable to the cold, and I feared hypothermia would claim me before any help arrived. I was jolted awake sometime later by a hollering voice, "Is anybody here? Can anyone hear me?" Rushing to the fridge door, I pounded on it, shouting back, "I'm in here. I'm here, hello? I'm Jorgen from the Norwegian research station on Livingston Island. We contacted you yesterday for assistance." After a slight pause, a thick Norwegian accent responded, "We're here. We came as soon as we could." I flipped the lantern back on briefly, before working to untie the twine and flung the fridge door open. The sight of Jorgen standing there was more reassuring than anything I had ever seen. My heart lifted, but I quickly sought answers. "Did you run into the skinless men when you arrived?" He gazed at me quizzically and replied, "No, we haven't encountered anyone. We found 2 rooms with blood everywhere and red stones scattered about. Yet nobody was here. Is there anyone else?" "No, I'm the only one left," I told him solemnly. I followed Jorgen out to meet his 3 companions who had come along. As we walked past Ian and Ross's bedrooms, I saw the gruesome remnants smeared across the floor, blood and those crimson stones just as he had described. My gaze fell on the rock room, where I noticed more of those brilliant red stones strewn on the ground. An unsettling suspicion gripped me. I felt these stones were linked to the horror that unfolded, yet I would never uncover the truth. Once the Australian government learned of the events, they dispatched a special team from Australia to investigate, seeking the whereabouts of the missing men. Weeks spent searching yielded no trace of them. Years later, while McCree was tending to his yard, a man approached him, claiming to represent the special team that investigated the island after the scientists' disappearance. He mentioned having faced issues during their expedition but declined to elaborate. McCree's heart sank as he sought closure, asking if the man knew anything that could provide it. The man simply replied, "Stay away from that island.